Everyone loves an abandoned station. This week, I give you two because I am just all heart. The first one we're going to look at is quite well known. It's York Road and it's pretty easy to find. Simply walk along York Way alongside King's Cross Station and keep going. I'm not saying it's more exciting than visiting the Harry Potter shop, but it's still pretty good. York Road is not, in itself, a super remarkable station. It's on the Piccadilly line between King's Cross St Pancras and Caledonian Road. It was opened in 1906 by the Great Northern, Piccadilly and Brompton Railway. It was designed by the architect Leslie Green, who was responsible for the house style of Underground Electric Railways of London, who owned the Great Northern, Piccadilly and Brompton Railway. It never did so well in terms of traffic and wound up closing in 1932, the year before the line officially became part of the London Underground. Even though we're only a mile or so from King's Cross, this area is very different. It's a much less built-up area with a lot of light industry and residential development. Not quite as bustling as Finsbury Park or King's Cross, and maybe that's why the station remained as it was for so long. In the early 2000s it was cleaned up and underwent a bit of a restoration. It's still in use by TfL, but for operational support and as an emergency exit from the Piccadilly line. I wonder if it might have had more traffic if it had been a bit further down the road by today's other station. Maiden Lane is less visible, but once you know it's there, it's obvious. Its name reflects changes in the street name over the years. The road was originally named Maiden Lane, then it was renamed York Road in the 19th century, and then in 1938 it was renamed York Way. The station is on what's now the North London line of the London Overground, between Camden Road and Caledonian Road and Barnsbury. The station was built in 1887 by the North London Railway, who already had a good station nearby to serve the metropolitan cattle market. Residential developments had begun to appear, and the North London Railway, who had stations in the city proper, figured they could cash in. What did for them was demographics. The residents in the area were largely employed by local industries and had no need for a route into the city. Those who did need to travel favoured the cheaper and more modern electric trams, or, later on, the Underground. Traffic was therefore low. The station was closed as a wartime measure in 1917, and the North London Railway took the opportunity to rid themselves of a loss-maker, and never reopened it. The North London Railway and the Piccadilly line really couldn't have been much more different. One was a goods railway with a sideline in passenger traffic, the other was a modern commuter subway. But the story of their stations is almost identical, built for traffic that, in the end, wasn't there. Perhaps the Piccadilly thought they could succeed where the North London hadn't by stimulating development, as underground lines had elsewhere in London. In the years following the Second World War, this area, known as the Railway Lands, went into a decline. Industries moved out and drug dealers and prostitutes moved in. But that's started to change. The idea of redevelopment has been in the air since the 1990s, and the completion of High Speed 1 and the revitalisation of St Pancras has made the area around King's Cross a whole lot more attractive for developers. The project is known as King's Cross Central, and has seen the refurbishment of a lot of older buildings and the construction of new ones. Inevitably, the question has been asked, how about reopening one of the stations? York Road would appear to be the obvious one. The building's still there, and though the platforms are gone, they could be reinstated. But it's not as simple as that. York Road is an old station, and a lot has changed on the Underground since it closed. It has no escalators or fire doors. The ticket hall is relatively small. TfL's options would be either to perform a basic refurbishment, which would limit capacity, or do a full rebuild, which would be expensive. There's also the question of how it affects the rest of the line. it would slow journeys between King's Cross and Finsbury Park, and TfL fears that it would cause overcrowding on the Piccadilly line at King's Cross. So this idea has been largely dismissed. Maiden Lane is more attractive. It would be a fraction of the cost. £40 million is the estimated cost of reopening York Road, while Maiden Lane could be done for as little as £6 million. The North London line has more capacity for extra passengers and doesn't currently serve King's Cross. In 2012, the Mayor's office declared that this too was unlikely to open due to constraints on the site. Which seems odd to me. The site of the building is still in place, there appears to be room for platforms, and thanks to automation, a station needs far less by way of facilities now than it did in 1887. But I'm no engineer. If you know more, let me know in the comments section. In 2019, Morris & Co. architects proposed an interesting scheme to redevelop York Road into a homeless shelter, though God only knows what the developers at King's Cross Central would make of that. Unfortunately, because TfL does still have uses for it, they aren't willing to hand it over completely. And nobody seems willing to say, finally, definitively, for absolute certain that the station is never going to reopen. It looks like it's going to be in limbo for a long time to come. Hello, I hope you enjoyed this faintly desolate tale from the tube. If you did, there's a like button and a subscribe button if you want to see more, and apparently you have to hit the bell icon these days to be informed when I've uploaded something, which usually happens 3 times a week. So what's your opinion? Would you use either of these stations if they were reopened? Let me know in the comments section. And I'll see you again very soon for another tale from the tube.